Hello there, and welcome to the final part of my introduction to Philly's transit, where we go into the humble workhorses of the city's transit network, the trolleys and the buses. Yes, the trams, streetcars, whatever you guys call them elsewhere, we call them trolleys around here, and that's not just coming from someone who was raised watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood either. Not only does Philly still have trolleys, but they serve an invaluable role on the routes they survive on and are in for some exciting modernization in the years to come. But let's not completely forget SEPTA's ridership bread and butter, the buses, either. They may not be as glamorous or noteworthy as some other modes of transport around here, but they're still deserving of respect too, and there are some aspects of it that are certainly unique in their own right. So with that being said, let's finish the Philly Transit Guide trilogy by talking about the humble but useful buses and trolleys that work hard behind the scenes to make Philly's city and suburbs tick. Before we go too much further, let's talk about a few names that you will see. For a start, I will not be talking about intercity coach bus operators like Flixbus, Greyhound, and Megabus, since that's a whole other topic and not really relevant to getting around the city or suburbs. I also won't be talking about smaller operators like Navy Yard Transit, as well as tourist-oriented operations like the Flash that's deserving of its own discussion. And in the case of the latter, I check out this video from the Hungry Transit fan describing the Flash service. What is relevant is of course our old friend SEPTA, as they run the vast majority of the buses and of course the trolleys in the city and the suburbs to the west. Also to be mentioned are New Jersey Transit, as they run bus services that go into and out of Philly, serving as a link between the city and its eastern suburbs in New Jersey, alongside running a rather unique light rail line on the Jersey side of the river too. I'll also be briefly mentioning other operators that SEPTA provides connections with, most notably DART, the state transit operator of Delaware. So with that said, let's get things started, and we'll do so with one of my favorite aspects of Philly's transit, the trolleys. Now, the story of Philly's trolleys is a long and complicated one, and in fact I made a whole video on the topic last year. And in fact, a lot of the bus lines that we know today began their life as trolley routes in the distant past. But for now, I will merely mention that out of the dozens of trolley lines that once crisscrossed the city and ran into the suburbs, only 8 of them still survive to this day, 6 of them serving the city proper, and the 2 suburban routes. And just to make things even more crazy, there's 3 divisions of the trolleys among those routes that are left. They being the Suburban lines, the subway surface lines, and Route 15. Yeah, just Route 15. It's kind of a special case that I covered in my video on the matter, so here's the link to that. The most numerous and most used of the trolley lines are the subway surface lines, named as such because of their use of the Market Street subway tunnel that actually runs in the same tunnel as the Market Frankford line that I talked about in my last video, with some stations like 30th Street and the tunnel's terminus at 15th and 13th Streets right underneath City Hall providing free transfers between the services. The tunnel itself starts in the underground loop at City Hall and continues west underneath Market Street, providing really cool little races between the trolleys and the L before the 5 lines diverge to the 2 portals onto street level. The main one of the 2 is the 40th Street portal at 40th, Woodland Avenue, and Baltimore Avenue, which carries 4 of the 5 routes out to West Philadelphia, they being Route 11 to Darby Transportation Center, Route 13 to Yeaton, though it has run to Darby as well in the past, Route 34 to Angora, and Route 36 to Eastwick. The main outlier here is Route 10, which is the only line to use the second portal to the tunnel at 36th and Ludlow Streets on its run up to Overbrook in the northwest, coming oh so close to a connection with the Paoli-Thorndale Regional Rail line at Overbrook Station. Maybe one day. Now, full disclosure here, I'm making this video at kind of a weird time for the trolley services and even the buses too, since they, like the rapid transit lines I talked about in my last video, are getting new designations and signage to improve wayfinding. Thankfully, the ones for the rapid transit lines, the Market Frankford line being marked with L, as in the letter L, the Broad Street line marked with B, and the Norristown High Speed line marked with M for Montgomery County, and of course maintaining their color designations, the trolleys are a bit more awkward. For the subway surface lines, these lines are retaining their green markings on the signage and are being rebranded with T, meaning tunnel, with the lines slowly being rebranded as T1 for Route 10, T2 for Route 34, T3 for Route 13, T4 for Route 11, and T5 for Route 36. Now, speaking personally, I definitely get the reason for this rebranding, and I do like it since before that, the trolleys could easily be confused to the uninitiated like just a normal bus line, since they share the same system. But as of the time of writing, the rebrand is still very much in its transition phase, and I'm sure this is going to be a bit of confusion before we reach true acceptance of this idea. And even then, you know a lot of old timers will complain about it until the end of time. I mean, they do with regional rail, don't they? Regardless though, the vehicles that the subway surface lines run with will change very little, at least for the time being. The 5 subway surface lines use these boxy looking trolleys known as the K-cars. Built by Kawasaki in the 1980s, they're definitely what one would think of a 1980s vision for a classic streetcar. Despite their age, they continue to be fairly reliable, though with some noted difficulties as of late, as well as the occasional time where the trolley poles can come off the wires if the operator is not careful. Yes, these cars still use old-fashioned trolley poles instead of more modern pantographs to get their electric power, something one other part of the network shares. And in fact, the only other line that has this in Philly is the only one that does not run the K-cars at the present, and that is Route 15, the only survivor of the trolley lines in the city that doesn't use the subway tunnel. Running along the length of Girard Avenue in North Philadelphia from Haddington in the west to Port Richmond in the east, with the main artery of Girard Avenue giving the route its new designation of the G, not that one, Route 15 still serves as a vital role as a fast crosstown connection to the north of Center City, serving Temple University, the Philadelphia Zoo, and several major northern neighborhoods, including several seeing redevelopments in recent years. Now, the main thing you probably notice immediately is the trolleys they run on this line. In contrast to the 1980s vintage and rather clinical K cars for the rest of the network, Route 15 uses some of Philadelphia's oldest active vehicles, a twice rebuilt fleet of 1940s era PCC streetcars. Personally, this has always been a favorite route of mine, especially since these cars have been lovingly refurbished by SEPTA staff over the last few years. The 15 was run by buses between January 2020 and mid-2024 for multiple reasons I talk about in that other video, but in that time, the PCCs received an overhaul. It's evident to me that these were a true passion project by SEPTA staff, as the PCCs run great and are pretty comfortable to boot, rock hard seats aside, and surprisingly, they have better disabled accessibility than the K cars. Ain't that embarrassing? On top of that, these trolleys are painted not in SEPTA's modern white, red, and blue livery, but rather in the still iconic green and cream paint scheme of the Philadelphia Transportation Company, which ran Philadelphia's trolleys, buses, and subways in the time when these trolleys were built. I definitely have a few things to say about the PTC in their time before SEPTA came to be, but one thing that cannot be denied is that their paint schemes are still beautiful. It truly is a testament to the staff and their drive to keep the trolley service going that these cars are still running in regular service 75 years after they were first built. And it will be sad to see them retired in a few years' time when the new trolleys come along, though they definitely deserve a dignified retirement, and it'll be great to see them still run for heritage trips or in museums. And hopefully, they will be getting a good replacement to carry the torch too. In February 2023, SEPTA put in an order with Alstom for a fleet of 120 articulated trolleys, part of Alstom's successful Citatis family of articulated trams, to replace the current trolley fleet on all routes, including the 2 left to talk about here, and a favorite among enthusiasts, myself included, the 2 Suburban routes, routes 101 and 102. Originating out of 69th Street Transportation Center in Upper Darby, where passengers can transfer to the Market Frankford and Norristown high-speed lines, among others, The Route 101 and 102, with their route markings in pink and slowly receiving the new designations of D1 for the 101 and D2 for the 102, D standing for Delaware County where they mostly serve, are the last survivors of the trolley routes run by the famous Red Arrow lines, which ran a network of interurban trolleys and buses all across the western suburbs of Philadelphia, including the Norristown High-Speed Line itself, among several others that I will discuss in the future. From 69th Street, the two lines run on the same set of tracks along Garrett Road until it reaches Drexel Hill Junction, with the 101 continuing through Drexel Hill and Springfield on its way to, oh hey, it's to my hometown, Media, considered by some to be the last true streetcar suburb in the US, as it still has the 101 travel down the town's popular main shopping strip of State Street until it reaches its terminus at a rather unremarkable stop after the intersection of State and Orange Streets. Meanwhile, the 102 branches off to the south at Drexel Hill, serving more stops in Drexel Hill itself before passing through Clifton Heights, where passengers can transfer to the Media Wawa Regional Rail line at Clifton Alden Station, before running through Alden and Collingdale before reaching its final terminus at a small stone station on Chester Pike in Sharon Hill, where connections with several suburban bus lines can be had. When it comes to the classic interurban trolleys that used to run almost literally everywhere in the US, there's sadly not many of them left, especially since they would be incredibly useful today in a lot of cases. So it's really gratifying to see that these two lines are still maintained, not only for the valuable service they provide, but also for the scenic environments they pass through while making good speed, particularly on the 101. There are a lot of things that can certainly be improved on with both routes, especially with the annoying bottlenecks to clear and signaling issues sometimes, but it's not hard to see why these routes are fan favorites, even if they stop just short of places like Center City. Like the subway surface lines, the suburban routes use Kawasaki K-car trolleys, but the keen-eyed among you would notice a couple of differences about them. Externally, the most obvious thing is that they have cabs on both ends of the car, since the two termini of the routes in Media and Sharon Hill don't have turning loops, so they actually are like trams around most of the world are now. Another external difference is that they actually use pantographs instead of trolley poles like modern trams do, since pantographs are more reliable and can move more electric current, but the interiors are where the obvious differences to the rider are. As opposed to the bus-like hard seats you have on the subway surface cars, these ones at least have a little bit of padding on the seats and are definitely well suited for the longer journeys that they can run. Overall though, the services are very much useful, and this, along with the last rail service to talk about in this video, shows what the old interurban trolleys were capable of, and what they could be again if they are considered in the future we need to strive towards. But until then, time to get to the buses. SEPTA's bus network can broadly be broken down into two divisions, the City Transit Division and the Suburban Division, and true to form, it's broken down by bus routes that serve the city itself and the ones that go out to the suburbs. Well, for the most part anyway. I say that because the weird point here is Cheltenham Township, just over the city border in Montgomery County, which has bus services all run by the City Transit Division rather than the Suburban Division. But in any case, the City Transit Division consists of 79 routes as of the time of writing, and does a good job in covering high-use corridors as well as covering lesser-used neighborhoods well out of the reaches of services like the rapid transit lines. The main way one could probably tell the distinction between them is the numbers of the routes. If the route numbers are less than 90, it's the City Transit Division. If the route is higher than 90, it's the Suburban Division. Though, one curious feature of the city's network is that there were, up until recently, 7 routes, now 1, that are designated not with numbers, but with letters, they being the G, H, J, K, L, R, and XH, the latter of which being an express variant of the H. This harkens back to a tradition that the PTC had, where routes that were created as bus routes from the very beginning were designated with letters, whereas the routes that began their life as trolley lines were given numbers. After most of the trolley routes were ripped up in the 1950s, the numbers and letters survived purely because that's what people remembered their routes by. On February 23, 2025, however, these routes were changed to have numbers instead of letters, as the letters are now being used for rail transit routes, and some of them directly conflict with the letter designations of some routes, looking at the G and L here. As a result, the G became the Route 63, the H became the Route 71, the J became Route 41, the L became Route 51, the R became Route 82, and the XH became Route 81, with the Route K keeping its designation for the time being. Most of the routes run in a typical North American style of a bus network, predominantly in mixed traffic with a few examples of dedicated bus lanes in center city and in certain places scattered throughout the city as well, along with a dedicated bus corridor used by the Route 103 through Ardmore using a former trolley right-of-way from the Red Arrow lines. Totally not bitter about it at all. Totally. There's frankly so much to cover with each individual route that it would defeat the purpose of making this analysis somewhat quick, though there are some points of note. The most frequent bus routes you will typically find will run at 15-minute intervals off-peak and usually consist of the highest demand routes, such as the most used bus route in the city, Route 47, which runs along 5th and 6th Streets from Godfrey Street way up in northeast Philly, all the way to Whitman Plaza in far south Philly, near the Walt Whitman Bridge, along with the vital east-west Route 21, which basically parallels the Market-Frankford line from 69th Street to Penn's Landing, and the major north-south corridors served by the 23 and the 45 between Chestnut Hill in the north, Center City, and Oregon Avenue in South Philly, which, true to form, used to be the Route 23 trolley, something I vent a bit about in my Philly Trolleys video, in fact. While you would expect the overwhelming majority of the most frequent routes to be in the city, which most of them are, there are actually two routes, the 108 between 69th Street and the airport, and the 113 between 69th Street and Darby going down McDade Boulevard in Delaware County, that run to 15-minute frequencies off-peak. Most of the time though, the suburban routes run hourly at best, with some like the 104 between 69th Street and Westchester running half-hourly. Although there is a fair amount of interlining that could help to augment services on these major corridors. An example here being on Westchester Pike or Pennsylvania Route 3 in Delaware County, which sees service from as many as 5 different routes for a substantial length of this major strode pretending to be a road. This is also true of the Center City bus lanes, which help to speed up traffic for buses on countless routes that serve Center City proper, including for what are known as the Owl buses, which run in the middle of the night when the Market-Frankford line and Broad Street line subways close down for the night after the midnight hours. Even in the city though, a lot of bus routes do run hourly, particularly those that could be described as coverage routes, i.e. running a token bus service just so that people in that area can get a transit service, even if ridership is not expected to be high. Perhaps the most notorious and ridiculous example of a route like this is Route 89, which zigzags across North Philly near Frankford Avenue to pick up additional passengers to connect them to the likes of the Market-Frankford line and other bus routes, which leads it going nearly 10 miles to cover the 3-mile distance that the L takes between its termini. Yes, really. I'll also note that I'm writing this video also at a really awkward time for Philly's bus services, since SEPTA was in the middle of trying to fruitlessly get their long-promised bus revolution off the ground, which would have been a major shakeup of a lot of the bus routes, but after a recent budget fiasco that's thankfully been resolved for the moment, SEPTA just quietly dropped the whole bus revolution thing and are now setting their eyes on a more pared-back bus service adjustment, of which I have little information to go off of at present. Wait and see, I guess? Alongside the main routes that are the true bread and butter of the network, SEPTA does operate 2 unique services with different branding to try and make them stand out. The first and easily the most famous of the two is the Boulevard Direct service, which is an express bus service running from Frankford Transportation Center up through Northeast Philly on its namesake, the infamous Roosevelt Boulevard, one of the most dreaded thoroughfares in the entire country, up to the Neshaminy Mall right on the edge of the city limits. What makes this route so special is the fact that it's a limited stop service compared to the numerous other bus routes that stop and pick up and drop off passengers at nearly every street corner. And as such, the Route 14 bus, which runs between the 2 termini at the same 15-minute intervals off-peak, albeit going further afield and deviating a lot, takes 45 minutes to go between Frankford and Neshaminy, whereas the Boulevard Direct takes 28 minutes. though in both cases that's highly predicated on the traffic situation on the Boulevard, which can certainly fluctuate from not terrible but not fun to agony personified. And to differentiate the service, the Boulevard Direct stops are much larger and have bigger information displays, and the buses for the service are painted in two-tone green paint schemes rather than the traditional SEPTA white with red and blue stripes, though the interior is no different from a standard bus. More on that in a bit. The other unique service is further south, with SEPTA's Loop Around University City, or LUCI service. Yeah, that's one way to make an acronym. As the name suggests, these two services run as a loop around the neighborhood of University City, serving as a vital transit link for students at the University of Pennsylvania and Drexel University, as well as medical staff at the nearby hospitals, such as Penn Medicine and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Now, I say there are two services, but in actuality it can best be described as one service, with both routes running on the same roads connecting 30th Street, Market Street, 40th Street, Health Sciences Drive, and 33rd Street, and serving 30th Street Station, Penn Medicine Station on the regional rail, 40th Street on the L, the colleges, and the hospitals. The two services just run in different directions, with the green loop running clockwise and the gold loop running counterclockwise. Other than the routes and their names, the main thing that stands out about these services are the buses they run and their special paint schemes, with their New Flyer MIDI buses running a unique white, green, and gold paint scheme. And after all that fun, I think it's time we talk about the buses themselves and what they're like. The overwhelming majority of SEPTA's buses are made by Canadian manufacturer New Flyer, and the very oldest vehicle in the current fleet dates back to 2004, and the newest ones continue to arrive, and as of April 2024, every bus in SEPTA's fleet is now at least some sort of electric power, with the overwhelming majority of the fleet being hybrids. And everything else, well, I'll explain. New Flyer makes most of the models of standard city buses that SEPTA uses, with older D40LFs starting to be phased out in favor of newer DE40LFRs and the newer Excelsior series arriving from 2017 onward. Alongside the fleet of mainstays, New Flyer also makes the MIDI buses used for the aforementioned LUCI service, and several other smaller shuttle routes on SEPTA's network, which, if you're from Europe and the UK in particular, the MIDIs may look familiar, since they're a license-built version of the Alexander Dennis Enviro 200 minibus. Who says America doesn't have European buses? Well, to be fair, they aren't anywhere near as numerous, so that's probably not a valuable statement anyway. As for their articulated buses, they are the largest component of SEPTA's fleet made by a different manufacturer, with the Bendy Boys being 62-foot-long Nova Bus LFS-A models. Although, if you look carefully, you may be able to see some rare Nova Bus LFS standard models in service too. And both of these models are hybrids as well. It's also worth mentioning that beginning in 2019, SEPTA began an experiment with battery-powered buses, obtaining a small fleet of Proterra catalysts to run on two routes in South Philly, the 29 and the 79 as a proof of concept. Unfortunately, the result was a failure, with all the battery buses being removed from service due to the frames of the buses cracking because the batteries were too heavy. Yeah, not great. Particularly since these two routes that they were trialed on were already run on by electric vehicles in the past, and those electric vehicles are still being used in Philly elsewhere. For those connecting the dots right, you're correct. SEPTA has a fleet of trolleybuses, or trackless trolleys as we call them around here. SEPTA currently has a fleet of 38 New Flyer E40LFs on the three trackless trolley routes in Northeast Philly, routes 59, 66, and 75, with the 66 even having 4 sets of wires on part of the route to run express services, which doesn't seem all that useful honestly since I wrote it. On the whole, it's a really cool novelty that I wish Philly had more of again, but it's better than most cities who stupidly got rid of their trolley buses, which are the overall best option for zero-emission bus service in so many facets, even with a presumed drive towards environmental goals. Boston! So, if you're around Northeast Philly, definitely give the trackless trolleys a try out, not least because they're the only buses currently in service that have rear windows, like a trolley, funnily enough. As for the buses in general, they tend to follow a standard bus layout with 2+2 seating towards the rear and longitudinal seating towards the front, which also serves as the wheelchair space, with pretty firm plastic seats with literally no padding. And depending on the model of bus you happen to be on, some can go from regular old-fashioned dot matrix strip displays to rather nice modern screen systems showing the expected arrival times at stops. That is, if they happen to be working. Also, alongside the old-fashioned stop cords to alert the driver of your stop, newer buses are also being fitted with buttons on the grab poles. Welcome to the modern age. All told though, if you're in any way familiar with buses in other parts of the country, there isn't too terribly much that makes them stand out, but they've certainly been solid and they get the job done. Though, I don't think the often potholed nature of Philly streets help much with their rattly reputation around here. That said, aside from Bus Revolution Light, which I guess I'll call their bus revamp, there's definitely other areas to keep an eye on for the future. While their foray into battery buses was less than successful, SEPTA is now looking into hydrogen fuel cell buses as a possible alternative fuel source, with a hydrogen-powered New Flyer Excelsior just hitting the streets for the first time in April last year. And while I'm not the biggest fan of hydrogen when it comes to things like trains, for very justifiable reasons, hydrogen buses could be an interesting use case, especially in city environments. There's also debates about places where Bus Rapid Transit, or BRT, could work, particularly on the aforementioned Westchester Pike in the suburbs, or on Roosevelt Boulevard as a complement to the prospective Roosevelt Boulevard subway, which needs to be built. While the rail projects take a lot of the limelight, buses shouldn't be unconsidered either, just saying. But in any case, on to two other operators in the region that are worth mentioning. The first is the Delaware Transit Corporation, better known as DART First State, I guess so as not to confuse it with DART in Dallas-Fort Worth. This is the statewide transit entity for the state of Delaware, kind of their own version of New Jersey Transit, but smaller in every way. Systems like theirs could probably be worth its own video, but one key thing about them in particular with relation to SEPTA is that DART actually owns 3 of the 4 active train stations in the state of Delaware, and thus 3 of the 4 stations served by SEPTA Regional Rail in Delaware, the only exception being Wilmington Station, which is owned by Amtrak. In terms of the bus services, the closest nexus point between SEPTA services and DART services is just over the state line at Claymont Station, which, alongside being a park and ride station for the Wilmington-Newark Regional Rail line, also serves as a connecting point between the SEPTA Route 113 Suburban bus from 69th Street to 2 DART routes, the 13 and the 61, with the latter going to Brandywine Town Center to the west, and the former going to a Walmart in Newcastle via downtown Wilmington, while also connecting to the Wilmington train station as well. Wilmington Station serves as easily the biggest transit hub in the entire state, connecting 16 DART bus routes to Amtrak and SEPTA trains, Amtrak Thruway buses, as well as Greyhound buses. Next, similarly to Claymont, Churchman's Crossing Station not only provides immediate connections to a casino and horse racing track, but also to 2 other DART bus routes, the 54 and the 62. And the Wilmington-Newark line's end terminus at Newark allows for connections with shuttle buses to the University of Delaware, 3 DART routes, the 10, 33, and 46, along with further connections on Cecil Transit's number 4 service to Elkton, Maryland, thus allowing SEPTA services to be a good jumping off point for really specific interstate connections. Along those same lines is the bus services run by New Jersey Transit, which, unlike DART, actually have services that make it into the city proper, thus eliminating the need to transfer if you're starting in Center City. Currently, NJT operates quite a few bus routes out of Philadelphia, with them either centered around 30th Street Station, the natural place to do so, and the other at 6th and Vine Streets right next to Franklin Square near the entrance to the Ben Franklin Bridge, which will have a new connection to Patco and some SEPTA buses, but not much else. And feature services such as the Center City Connection services, no, not that one, that run local services from Philadelphia to Camden and other nearby towns in South Jersey, all the way to longer distance express coach bus services from Philadelphia to Atlantic City and Cape May. And I think many would agree that the buses there tend to be a bit more comfortable than the SEPTA buses, since the seats actually have padding, and the coach buses, while getting up in age, are built to be comfortable to begin with. And with the longer routes that the NJT buses typically take, it stands to reason why that would be the case. On the downside is NJT's bus fare system, or as I like to call it, the transit fare's equivalent of a late game boss fight in a Dark Souls game. You can figure it out, but it will cost you your soul. Unless you're Alex Davis, who not only found it out, but made a song about it. No, I am not kidding. Check it out, links at the top. So I'll definitely say, if you don't want to think too hard about the fares, use the NJT app if you can. It just makes things a lot more streamlined, even if it has its own issues. But finally, rounding out New Jersey Transit, there's the other rail service that NJT runs around here that's not the Atlantic City line, and that is the River Line Light Rail service. Launched in 2004, the River Line is easily one of the most unique rail services in North America, and I can easily describe it as an interurban rebuilt for the modern age. Though in the modern vernacular, it could probably be described as the first hybrid rail service, running a lighter kind of train on heavy rail trackage that the likes of Austin, Dallas-Fort Worth, the Bay Area, and San Diego would later emulate. While the line isn't electric powered like a traditional interurban like the 101 and 102 trolleys are, the River Line very much behaves like one with its unique mix of environments that it goes through. Starting from the Camden waterfront with its prominent view of Philadelphia, the line snakes its way through Camden, making a connection with the Patco Speed Line before heading northeast along its namesake Delaware River through Pennsauken, Palmyra, Cinnaminson, Burlington, and its towny Centra, and Bordentown to the northern end terminus at Trenton Transit Center, where one can connect to the SEPTA Regional Rail Trenton Line, New Jersey Transit's Northeast Corridor Line, Amtrak trains, and numerous NJT bus routes. A full journey along this route would take just over an hour with all the stops and annoying bits of single track, but it's an enjoyable kind of trip with some beautiful scenery and some nice towns that it passes through. On top of that, the trains are definitely unique to say the least for North American services. These trains are Stadler GTW diesel multiple units, being one of the first times Stadler was commissioned for a project in the US and being the start of their successes in American transit manufacturing in recent years. And it's really the trains that make the line a hybrid rail system, and the use of European-style multiple units with American crashworthiness upgrades give a sense of what a typical European branch line has, with a classic American interurban characteristic of its routing. And add to the fact that part of the line is shared by freight trains running to and from Camden, making the GTWs look minuscule by comparison next to them. Though these trains are getting worn with their 20 years of service, they're still good machines that are decent to ride on. It's planned that with the eventual launch of a complementary service to this route in the form of the Glassboro-Camden line, that these trains will be replaced by new equipment, but nothing really has been confirmed about what that might be yet. Regardless, that's a topic I want to go more in depth in the future, so keep an ear out for that one. In the meantime, the River Line is definitely a useful, enjoyable, and vital connection giving good transit service to places along the river that were underserved for years, and I love its future potential. Just please find a way to make the service run later than 10 p.m. That'd be great. It would be no exaggeration to say that Philadelphia is a region with great transport diversity that often does not get the recognition that it could very well deserve, and that extends well beyond the flagship metro and regional rail networks either. Even the most utilitarian forms of transit in the cities and suburbs, the buses and the trolleys, have their interesting facets to them, from their history to the kinds of vehicles they use, to the mere fact that Philly kept as much of its trolley network around in the modern day that they did. And in the case of the River Line, it could have even sparked a revival of a form of transit lost to the past. While it certainly has its issues and annoyances, along with the transitional pains being experienced as the bus and metro services begin branding and route changes, SEPTA's buses and trolleys' importance to the city can hardly be understated. While they may not be well regarded by many, without them, the city stops, quite literally. The same can be said for all of the city and region's public transportation services and systems, and it's why it can be frustrating regarding a lot of issues that the system faces, as there is little doubt to many who look closely at the bones of SEPTA and public transport around Philly that the city of brotherly love could be home to what has had for a long time one of the best transit systems not only in the United States, not only in North America, but in the world. The bones are strong and the potential is sky high, thus helping to make Philadelphia a great place to live and work, and can even get better as time goes on. And that's definitely true with buses and trolleys, as the modernization plans for the latter and the bus network updates can for the former if done right. And that's worth its own discussion, of course, especially after what happened recently. It's rather gratifying to see more and more people seeing the benefits that a good public transit service can do for a neighborhood, a city, or a metro area, and that's holding true in Philly. And while many people, myself included, love to talk about strengthening the system long term via new lines of rail transit or even bus rapid transit, the humble bus or trolley is more than worthy of being talked about more, as they are the true lifeblood of the system, and they carry by far more passengers than any form of transport across all their services. And as transit becomes accepted more and more as being as important, if not more so to the future than cars, a city like Philadelphia can easily be an example to the rest of the nation of a city that can see tremendous positive benefits environmentally, economically, and socially by having a world-class public transit system. The potential certainly exists, but it's definitely not there yet. But it's there for the taking and is more than worth fighting for. So the next time you see the SEPTA buses roll by on your street, perhaps you can see it as being more intriguing than the mundane role that it may hold in life, whether it be something unique to the bus itself, the route it runs on, or just what it could possibly be with some changes, big or small. And from the bus, to the trolley bus, to the trolley and light rail, to the metro and regional rail, to intercity rail, the pieces of the puzzle for great transit are there for the city and region. And in the years to come, it may see the beginning of a true renaissance of a more efficient and enjoyable way of how we get around Philly.